Disney has a very complicated relationship with making sequels to their movies, because on the one hand, they famously chucked out what felt like 100 direct-to-video sequels to most of their classic films, and most of them weren't needed or very good ones. But when it comes to theatrically released sequels, they seem a lot more cautious. Or at least they did for a long time, since as I got into in my Moana 2 video, which you can find a link in the description to, that might very well change soon. But regardless, the point is that only 5 of their films have gotten theatrically released sequels as of the making of this video, with most of them being viewed as average at best. The only real exception to this is 2011's Winnie the Pooh, which is generally seen as a worthy follow-up to the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh. But I already dedicated a whole other video to that, which you can find a link in the description too, so I won't go into that any further. Instead, today I'd like to focus on what is often considered the black sheep of theatrically released Disney sequels, with that being The Rescuers Down Under, and try to determine if it's better than most other sequels Disney has made. And there will be spoilers for both it and The Rescuers ahead, so in case you haven't seen either of them yet but would like to, you shouldn't proceed with this video. This will be the only spoiler warning I'll be giving out. Okay, so at first one might question if The Rescuers Down Under is really all that different from the 4 other sequels released under the official Walt Disney banner, as barring Winnie the Pooh, it has a similar reputation to them at first glance. But the thing is, all of the other sequels have a general consensus surrounding them that most people agree on. For example, Winnie the Pooh is generally viewed as a good, enjoyable follow-up. Ralph Breaks the Internet is thought of as flawed at best and pretty awful at worst, and Frozen 2 and Moana 2 are generally seen as average. But alternatively, opinions on The Rescuers Down Under vary wildly, with some calling it an underrated masterpiece and others saying it was a useless cash grab that foreshadowed all the direct-to-video sequels that would be released later in the decade. So as a result, it's a lot harder to say how good or bad it actually is. Now, to be fair, I would say that neither of those extreme assessments are very accurate ones. Especially because one has to keep in mind that when it was made, Disney had no idea they were about to enter another golden age, so they were understandably trying to fall back on something that had been successful before, since at the time they were still trying to recover from the failure of The Black Cauldron. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here. What I'm trying to say is, in the mid-1980s, The Rescuers was originally supposed to be turned into a TV show about Bernard and Bianca traveling around the world to help children in need. But due to Disney desperately needing a theatrical hit after a string of flops, they repurposed the show into Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers and decided to make a sequel to The Rescuers instead, since the first one had made money. And this is why the film suffers from a few of the same problems that a lot of the later direct-to-video sequels did, and particularly trying to pad out the runtime with subplots, because it wasn't originally envisioned as a movie. But that being said, it doesn't suffer from these problems to anywhere near the extent that those later sequels would. Some of those were downright shameless in the way they would be stitched together. It may never win any Greatest Sequel of All Time awards either, but to place it in the same league as most of the direct-to-video sequels is not giving it nearly enough credit. Because when you really look at it, the movie does have stuff to offer, and among other things, it's actually pretty funny. Even if the subplots centered around fixing Wilbur's back or Cody and the animals trying to escape don't amount to much, they still do make for some rather funny gags. And not to mention, such scenes as Cody riding on the eagle's back or the climax are pretty impressive and engaging ones, with proper tension and high stakes. But perhaps one of the best things about this movie is its villain, Maclay. I mean, I already heavily praised George C. Scott's performance in another video, which you can also find a link in the description too. But seriously, this guy is everything that Madame Medusa was, only better. He's over the top, funny, pure evil, and not afraid to openly gloat about it, and manages to be threatening all at the same time. And if that doesn't make him an ideal Disney villain for a film of this nature, I don't know what does. And his dynamic with Joanna is also very well done, with her similarly being funny and threatening in equal measure, making her the perfect sidekick for a perfect villain. Honestly, McLean and Joanna were done so well that I would almost say it's worth watching the whole movie just for them alone. That's how great they are. They completely steal the movie and only help reinforce why people love Disney villains. But once again, and to be fair, the movie does have its share of issues too. Because while The Rescuers can't compare with Disney's best, it does have a solid plot and in the end is the enjoyable experience it was trying to be. But The Rescuers Down Under doesn't seem to know how to stretch its story into a feature-length film. Hence it adds subplots to fill time instead of continuously building on one storyline like the original does. And again, while the results aren't exactly bad, they aren't excellent either. And there's also the fact that it doesn't seem to know quite what to do with the characters and tries to add more dramatic weight by having Bernard build up the nerve to propose to Bianca. But at least it's done much better here than in Frozen 2, as it's more of a background element than the entire crux of his character, and the gags surrounding it are funnier and used more sparingly. But regardless of that, the point still remains that they seem to have a bit of a problem building on their relationship from the previous film, even if it does work out for the most part. And honestly, I'd say that right there sums up the entire movie in a nutshell. That it's a good follow-up to The Rescuers, but not much more than that. It's got pretty good characters, both old and new, solid humor, decent action, and a villain that steals the entire thing. But on the flip side, it's also a little slow-paced, the story isn't the greatest, and certain characters aren't done as well as they could have been. So as I just said, I do believe the fairest assessment of it would be to just call it good and leave it at that. Because it has its flaws, and it has its good points, so one's enjoyment of it really comes down to which aspects they're paying more attention to, and thus why the film is so polarizing. But as I said at the start, to try and argue that this is a bad movie would be way too harsh, as it's got too much going for it to be considered bad. Again, for what it was trying to be, which wasn't a ton, it succeeds pretty well, and its biggest problem was a lack of material for a feature-length film. To put it all another way, The Rescuers Down Under wasn't a needed sequel, and if the original movie was to have gotten one, it probably would have been better suited for television as was originally planned, since the setup was there to tell more stories with the same characters if they wanted to, and all of this does show in the final product. But at the same time, it manages to make the most of what it does have going for it, including the incredible talents of Eva Gabor and Bob Newhart in addition to many newcomers, to deliver a worthwhile follow-up in spite of that. Sure, maybe it's not the pinnacle of what a Disney sequel can be. Maybe it could have been better and more tightly written, but for what it is, it's pretty enjoyable to watch. And especially as a follow-up, is a lot better than most of Disney's later sequels, both theatrical and otherwise. Frankly, if something like Ralph Breaks the Internet had been to Wreck-It Ralph, anything like what The Rescuers Down Under is to The Rescuers, it would have been a much better movie. In the end, it's the kind of sequel the original deserved, and there's not much more you can ask of a sequel than that. even if it wasn't the best movie overall. Okay, I think I've gone on about this for long enough. So now I'd like you to tell me, do you believe that The Rescuers Down Under is one of the few Disney sequels that can actually be considered pretty good, or do you believe it's just as bad as most others of its kind? Please let me know in the comments below. But please keep in mind, you don't have to agree with anything I said in this video just because you watched it. You are entitled to your own opinion and can feel about The Rescuers Down Under any way you want to, and I nor anybody else can tell you you're wrong. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate all of it, and I hope to see you all next time.